After 6 years away building my company, I came home carrying my late wife's necklace for my daughter's birthday. But the moment my taxi stopped, I froze. A giant black memorial banner stretched across my front gate with my photo on it, in loving memory. I pressed my fingers to my own face just to be sure. My son-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "On paper, you've been dead for 6 years. Don't make this complicated." I thought that was the worst part, until the old housekeeper who'd worked for my family for 20 years pulled me aside in the dark and pressed a key into my hand. "Thank you for being here. It means more than you know." Quick question before this Revenge Dad story begins. What city are you in right now, and what time is it there? Comment below. I read every single one. Note, certain elements have been added for narrative purposes. Names and settings are fictional, but the lesson at the heart of this story is absolutely real. The taxi smelled like pine air freshener and old leather, and I didn't mind either one. 6 years of construction sites had given me a tolerance for bad smells and an appreciation for any smell that wasn't diesel or wet concrete. The pine was fake and aggressive, and I found it almost cheerful. I had the wooden box in my lap the whole ride from LAX. My hands kept returning to it without instruction. Fingers checking the latch, tracing the grain, confirming it was still there. Inside was a necklace, a small gold star on a delicate chain that my wife Margaret had worn every day for 23 years, until the morning the doctors told her the cancer had moved to her lymph nodes. She'd pressed it into my palm that morning and said, "Give this to Claire when the time is right." That was 6 years ago. Today was Claire's birthday, 32 years old. I'd decided in Portland, loading my bag at 4 in the morning, that if I hadn't found the right moment in 6 years, I'd better manufacture one. "This the address?" the driver asked. I looked up, and my first thought was that he'd made a mistake. The iron gate I'd installed at 1247 Oak Knoll Drive, simple, functional. The kind that said, "This is a home," had been replaced by something tall and ornate with gold scrollwork and white floral arrangements mounted every 10 feet along the brick wall. Lilies, mostly. A silver Bentley sat at the curb. A white Rolls-Royce bore a personalized plate that read, "Legacy 1." People in formal black moved through the gate in a slow procession. "Pull up closer," I said. He eased forward 30 feet. That's when I saw the banner. It stretched the full width of the gate, enormous, the kind that requires a cherry picker to hang. Black background, gold letters 3 feet high, and a photograph. My photograph. Me squinting in Oregon, summer sunlight, at a job site in Bend on my birthday, because I'd actually shown up to work that day, and my foreman had thought it was funny. Below the photograph, in loving memory of Walter Hale, 1962, 2019. 6 years gone, forever in our hearts, and below, that the Hale Legacy Foundation. Inaugural Memorial Gala. I paid the driver. I don't remember how much. I was already on the sidewalk with the wooden box against my chest, looking at my own face on a funeral banner before he finished calling after me. My legs were steady. That surprised me. I pressed 2 fingers to my jaw stubble I hadn't shaved since Portland, the small raised scar above my left eyebrow from a falling bolt 3 years ago. Warm skin, real pulse. My breath fogged in the November air. I was 62 years old and standing on a Pasadena sidewalk looking at a banner that said I'd been dead for 5 years before that scar existed. A woman in a black gown glanced at my work jacket and looked away with the expression wealthy people reserve for the wrong presence at the right occasion. Violin music threaded over the garden wall. I walked toward the gate. 2 guards in black suits stepped out before I reached it. Stone security badges. The one on the right had a jaw like poured concrete and eyes that had already decided what I was. Private event, invitation only. I don't need an invitation. My name is Walter Hale. This is my house. They looked at each other, then at the banner, then back at me. The one called Gunner laughed the loud, deliberate kind designed to humiliate. "Walter Hale's been dead since 2019. "Gunner?" The voice came from inside the gate. Calm, measured the voice of a man who has never once needed to raise it. Marcus Vane walked through in a black tuxedo with a foundation pin on his lapel, and when he saw me, his stride broke 1 foot suspended for half a second, before composure slammed back into place like a shutter closing. He steered me 6 feet to the left hand firm on my arm. "What are you doing here?" Low, barely moving his lips. Why does that banner have my name on it, Marcus? On paper, you've been dead for 6 years. Don't make this complicated, Walt. He held my gaze for 2 seconds, then nodded to the guards. I didn't fight it. Gunner's hand caught my shoulder. Another palm hit my back, and I went down hard knee on asphalt palm, scraping pavement, the wooden box skidding 2 feet ahead. My phone screen shattered corner to corner. The gate closed. The latch caught like a period ending a sentence. I knelt on the ground and listened to violin music and someone laughing inside the party being thrown in my name. I reached forward and picked up the wooden box. The latch had held. "Mr. Hale," a whisper. I turned. A small woman in a gray housekeeper's uniform stood at the shadow of the side gate, white hair pinned back, hands shaking visibly, eyes fixed on my face with an expression that took me 4 full seconds to name. "Rosa," I said. Her chin crumpled. She pressed her fist against her mouth, and her whole body shook with the effort of keeping whatever sound was trying to come out from coming out. Her chin crumpled. She pressed her fist against her mouth to stop whatever sound was trying to come out, and her whole body shook with the effort of holding it in. I got to my feet. Slowly, one hand braced on the brick wall for balance. My knee throbbed where it had hit the asphalt. I didn't look back at the gate. "Rosa," I said again, quieter this time. "It's me. I know it's you." Her voice came out cracked and uneven, like something that had been stored in a dry place too long. "Mr. Hale, I know it's you. I recognized you the second the taxi stopped. I've been standing at this window for 20 minutes trying to decide." She stopped, pressed her fist harder against her mouth. Her eyes squeezed shut. "Hey!" I crossed the distance between us and put my hand on her shoulder. She was trembling so hard I could feel it through my palm. "Take a breath. Nobody's watching this side of the wall." She opened her eyes, looked at me, then looked past me at the gate, at the guards, at the guests, still filtering through in their black gowns and dinner jackets, none of them paying any attention to the far edge of the property. "I have to go back inside in 3 minutes, she whispered. "Mr. Vane counts. He always counts." "Then talk fast. Where is Claire?" The question hit her like a physical thing. Her shoulders dropped. Her chin went down toward her chest, and for a moment she looked 20 years older than she had 30 seconds ago. "They never took her to any hospital," she said. "Not once, in 6 years. Every facility Mr. Vane described to you, the treatment center in Santa Barbara, the specialist in San Francisco, the residential program in Scottsdale, none of it was real." The violin on the other side of the wall played something slow and sweeping. Someone laughed inside, bright and unguarded. "Where is she, Rosa?" "The old carriage house." She looked up at me, and her eyes were so full of something guilt, grief, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a secret that was too heavy for one person and too dangerous to put down. "You remember the carriage house, sir? The one you converted to storage when Claire was in high school. It's behind the pool house past the rose garden. There's a path along the east wall. I remembered it. I'd built the shelving units in there myself, spent a whole weekend on it, Claire handing me screws and criticizing my technique while Margaret laughed at us both from the doorway. "How long?" I said. Rose's jaw worked. 3 years in the main room. Before that, Mr. Vane kept her in the east bedroom with the windows painted over, but guests started asking questions after a while, so she stopped, swallowed. 3 years. "Is she hurt?" "She's thin, very thin. I bring food when I can, Mr. Hale, whatever I can carry without him noticing. Last week I managed to get her a thermos of soup and half a sandwich, but the week before that," her voice broke off clean like a snapped branch. She pulled in a breath through her nose. "I'm sorry. I should have called someone. I should have called the police. I should have—" "Rosa." I squeezed her shoulder once. "You're telling me now. That's what matters. Is she conscious? Is she coherent?" "Yes. She knows where she is. She knows what's happening to her." Rosa's voice went very quiet. "That's the part that's hardest, sir. She's not confused. She understands everything. She just can't. He's told her things. About what will happen if she tries to get help. About what he'll do." "What things?" Rosa shook her head, not refusing to answer, unable to. I didn't push. "The key," I said. "The carriage house, is it locked?" She reached into the front pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small brass key on a plain ring. Her hand shook as she held it out, and the key rattled softly against itself. I took it from her carefully, the way you take something fragile that someone has been holding for too long. "There's something else," she said. Her voice had dropped to barely a breath. "In the carriage house. Something Mr. Vane has kept hidden from everyone, even from me for the first year until I figured it out on my own." She looked at my face, then quickly away. "You need to see it yourself, Mr. Hale. I don't know how to say it." "All right. The east path. Keep to the wall. The garden lights on that side burned out 2 weeks ago, and Mr. Vane hasn't had them fixed. It'll be dark the whole way." "I'll manage." She closed her fingers briefly over mine, just for a second, her cold hand over my calloused one, and then she was already turning back toward the side gate, moving with the practiced quietness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "Rosa," I said. She paused but didn't fully turn. "You're not in trouble. Whatever happened here, you're not in trouble." A sound came out of her then that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. She touched the edge of the gate with her fingertips. "Please hurry, Mr. Hale," she said. "Please." The gate clicked shut behind her. I stood alone on the sidewalk. The key was warm from her pocket. I closed my fist around it. I don't know exactly when Margaret died in my memory in that moment, but she did. Not the fact of her death that had been with me every day for 6 years, an ache I'd stopped trying to name. What died standing on that sidewalk was the story I had told myself about why I left. I'd told myself I left because I couldn't bear to be in that house without her, that every room had too much of her in it, her coffee mug still in the cabinet, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her handwriting on the grocery list, on the refrigerator. I told myself I left for Claire's sake too, that the grief in that house was infectious, and Claire needed a father who was functional, not one who stood in doorways and forgot what he'd walked in for. I told myself I left to build something, to fulfill a promise, to give them both the life Margaret had always imagined. And all of that was true. But standing on the sidewalk outside my own gate with my knee aching and my phone screen cracked and a strange woman's key in my hand, what I understood for the first time clearly without argument, the way you understand something when you no longer have any reason to look away from it, was that I had also left, because it was easier than staying. Because staying meant watching Claire grieve and not knowing how to help her. Because staying meant being present for every milestone and every ordinary Tuesday and every moment that should have had 4 people in it and only had 2. Because staying meant being a father in full, not just a provider from a safe distance. And I hadn't been sure I knew how to do that without Margaret there to make it look easy. I had left, and I had called it love. I pressed the wooden box against my chest and breathed through my nose until the tightness in my throat had no choice but to pass. Then I turned toward the east wall and started walking. The garden lights on that side were out exactly like Rosa had said. The path was narrow and uneven, hemmed in by the brick wall on my left, and what had once been a rose garden on my right. The roses were gone. In their place, weeds had grown to knee height and beyond dry and colorless in the November, chill crackling softly against my jeans as I pushed through. I'd planted those roses. The summer Claire turned 9, I'd spent 3 weekends getting the soil right because she'd seen a picture of a rose garden in a book at school and decided she needed one. Margaret had thought the whole project was wildly impractical and had said so cheerfully from a lawn chair while drinking iced tea and watching me dig. I pushed the memory down. The carriage house emerged from the darkness slowly, the way shapes do when your eyes have adjusted, but the light is still very poor. A low building maybe 30 feet across with a rusted metal roof and walls that had once been white stucco and were now the color of old newsprint. A heavy chain ran through the door handles secured by a padlock. I had designed this lock system. I had put it in myself years ago to keep the neighborhood kids from getting into the power tools. I approached the door slowly, put my palm flat against it. From inside, faint and unmistakable, came the sound of someone breathing. "Claire," I said. Not loud, just loud enough to carry through the door. The breathing changed, stopped for a moment, then came back faster. "Claire, it's Dad." Silence. Then so quietly I almost missed it beneath the sound of a car passing on Oak Knoll Drive and the distant violin from inside the house. "Daddy!" My hand tightened on the key. The key fit on the first try. The padlock released with a sound that seemed too loud for the quiet of the back garden, a sharp metallic snap that made me freeze for a full 3 seconds listening for footsteps, for voices, for any sign that someone on the other side of the property had heard. I'd studied the camera position through the gap in the door before I used the key. The mount in the upper corner covered the interior, not the entrance. Whatever happened at this threshold, the lens couldn't see it. The violin from inside the house carried on without interruption. A car moved slowly down Oak Knoll Drive. Nothing else. I unwound the chain from the handles. It was heavier than it looked, the links thick and cold against my palms, and pushed the door open. The smell hit me before my eyes could adjust. It wasn't one thing. It was several things layered on top of each other, the way smells accumulate in spaces that don't get fresh air, damp concrete, mildew, the particular sourness of a room that has been lived in for too long without adequate ventilation. Underneath all of it, something else. Something that made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with smell. I stepped inside and let my eyes adjust. The carriage house was bigger than it felt from outside. 30 feet deep, maybe 20 wide, with a ceiling that arched slightly in the middle, where the original roof structure was still intact. I'd installed track lighting in here years ago when I converted it to storage. The tracks were still there, but the bulbs had been removed. The only light came from a single bare bulb on an extension cord switched off, hanging from a nail on the back wall. I used the light from my watch face to see by. Along the left wall, shelving units I'd built myself, now stripped of everything except a few cardboard boxes, and what looked like a camp stove still in its packaging. Along the right wall, nothing, just bare stucco water stained in long, vertical streaks from a leak in the roof that hadn't been fixed. On the floor in the far right corner, a mattress. Low to the ground, no frame, no box spring. The kind of mattress that comes in a roll and is meant for a guest room that rarely has guests. It had been white once. It wasn't white anymore. On the mattress, pulled into the far corner, with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up to her chest, was my daughter. I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she'd changed her hair, though she had. It was cut short and uneven, the kind of cut that happens without a mirror and without much care about the result. Not because of the clothes, though. The gray cotton dress she was wearing had been washed so many times it had no color left to speak of. I almost didn't recognize her because of the way she was holding herself. Claire had always taken up space. Even as a child, she'd had a physical confidence about her. The way she'd walk into a room, the way she'd sit down at a table, like she had as much right to be there as anyone else, and had never once questioned it. Margaret used to say Claire had been born knowing her own mind. The woman in the corner was folded into herself, shoulders curved inward, head down, like someone who had spent a very long time practicing the art of being as small as possible. Claire! Her head came up fast. She scrambled backward until her shoulders hit the wall, a reflexive animal movement, the kind that happens before the thinking brain has time to catch up, and her hands came up in front of her, chest palms out. "Hey!" I crouched down, immediately making myself smaller, getting below her eye level. "Hey, it's me. It's Dad." She stared at me. In the dim light from my watch face, her eyes were enormous, dark circles beneath them that hadn't been there 6 years ago, a small scar at the corner of her mouth that I didn't recognize. "That's not—" She stopped. Her voice was rough from disuse, the words coming out thick and careful, like she was testing the weight of each one before committing to it. "You're not real. You died. I saw they showed me the certificate. They showed me a photograph of I didn't die." I reached into my jacket and opened the wooden box, held it out toward her, so the faint light caught the gold of the chain, the small star pendant resting against the dark velvet lining. "Your mother gave me this the morning she was diagnosed. She said to give it to you when the time was right. I've been carrying it for 6 years, waiting for the right time." Claire's breath caught. She looked at the necklace, then at my face, then at the necklace again. Her hands were shaking, both of them, the fingers trembling so badly that when she reached out toward the box, she had to try twice before she could touch it. She lifted the pendant with one finger, held it up. The star turned slowly in the air between us. "Moms," she whispered. "Moms," I said. Something broke open in her face, not gently. The way a dam breaks all at once without warning the structure, holding, and then simply not holding anymore. A sound came out of her that I had no name for, somewhere between a sob and a gasp, and she lurched forward off the mattress and into my arms so hard that we both nearly went over. I held on. She weighed almost nothing. That was the thing I couldn't stop noticing, even as I was holding her, even as she was shaking against my chest, and her fingers were gripping the back of my jacket like she needed something to anchor herself to. I could feel every bone in her shoulders, the knobs of her spine through the thin cotton of her dress. She felt like someone had taken my daughter and removed everything inessential and left only the structural minimum. Daddy. Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. Daddy. I've got you. I put one hand on the back of her head. I'm here. I've got you. We stayed like that for a long moment, her shaking and me holding on, and the bare bulb on its nail not giving any light, and the smell of damp concrete all around us, and the distant sound of violin music from a party being thrown in my name. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Outside the carriage house. Unhurried, deliberate footsteps on the stone path, the kind that belong to someone who knows exactly where they're going and has no reason to rush. I moved fast and quiet, pulled Claire upright, put my mouth close to her ear. Someone's coming. Get back to where you were. Don't look at the door. I scanned the room, found the gap between the stripped shelving unit and the wall barely 2 feet wide, deep enough in shadow. I'm going to be right here. Don't make a sound, sweetheart. Do you understand me? Her face had gone rigid. Whatever had broken open a moment ago had been sealed back up with something harder and more practiced. She nodded once quickly and moved back to the mattress in the corner with a speed and quietness that told me she'd had a great deal of experience moving quickly and quietly in this room. I pressed myself into the gap behind the shelving unit. The door opened. The woman who entered was in her mid-60s trim and straight-backed, wearing black slacks and a charcoal blouse with a silk scarf at her throat. She carried a small flashlight in one hand and a white dinner plate covered in plastic wrap in the other. On her right wrist, looped loosely, was a thin strap of braided leather, dark brown, the width of a finger. I had never seen her before in my life, but I knew immediately with a certainty that settled in my gut like cold concrete exactly who she was. Sylvia Vane, Marcus's mother, the woman Rosa had been too afraid to name. She didn't look at the shelving units, didn't look at the shadows. She moved directly to the center of the room, set the plate down on the floor, and turned the flashlight on Claire. "Stand up," she said. Her voice was pleasant. That was the thing that made the hair on my arm stand up. The voice was completely pleasant, the tone you'd use to ask someone if they'd like more coffee. Shoulders back. Let me see your hands. Claire stood, slowly. Shoulders back, hands out. Fingers spread, exactly as instructed. Turn around. Claire turned. Slower. Claire slowed. Sylvia watched with her head slightly tilted, the flashlight tracking up and down in a slow, assessing sweep, the leather strap swinging gently from her wrist. When Claire had completed the full rotation, Sylvia gave a small nod, the kind of nod a trainer gives a show dog after a clean performance. Now sit, cross-legged, hands in your lap. Claire sat. Head up. Look at the wall, not at me, at the wall. Claire looked at the wall. Sylvia peeled the plastic wrap from the plate, half a bread roll and a small portion of what looked like rice. She set it back on the floor, closer to the center of the room, then to Claire, close enough that Claire would have to move to reach it, far enough that it felt like a deliberate calculation. Your behavior this week has been adequate, Sylvia said in that same pleasant tone. Not good, adequate. You understand the distinction. Claire said nothing, kept her eyes on the wall. Marcus was generous enough to arrange tonight's event. Everything that happens in that room benefits your future security. You would do well to remember that. Sylvia picked up the plastic wrap, folded it neatly in half, and tucked it into her pocket. You may eat now. She turned and walked back toward the door. She was 4 feet from the shelving unit where I was standing. 3 feet. My hands were pressed flat against the wall behind me. I could feel my own heartbeat in my palms. On the mattress, Claire reached slowly for the bread roll and took a small, careful bite, chewing, without looking up, performing normalcy with the concentration of someone defusing something that might go off. In my mind, I ran the calculation. I could step out, confront Sylvia directly, physically remove her from this room. I was taller, heavier, and I was not a man who had spent the last 6 years at a desk. But at the top of the shelving unit now, 3 inches from my face, I could see something I hadn't noticed when I came in. A small camera mounted in the upper corner of the room. Red indicator light. Active. Marcus was watching this room in real time from somewhere inside the house. If I stepped out of this shadow right now, he would see it. He would know immediately that the containment of his entire plan had been compromised. And a man who had spent 6 years building something this careful and this complete would not sit and wait to be arrested. He would move. He would cover tracks. He would use every resource he had left. He would use Claire. I stayed in the shadow. Sylvia paused at the door, looked back at Claire eating the bread roll in small, careful bites. Something moved across her face, not satisfaction exactly, more like the quiet professional pleasure of a system operating correctly. "Sleep well," she said pleasantly. The door closed behind her. I counted her footsteps until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I stepped out of the shadow, crossed to Claire in 4 steps, and crouched down in front of her. Her hands had stopped shaking, and that was somehow worse than if they'd still been shaking. The trembling had been grief, been shock, been the body processing something overwhelming. The stillness was something she'd learned, a skill, a survival mechanism. She looked at me. Her eyes went to the corner of the ceiling. I nodded. I'd seen it. I leaned forward and put my mouth close to her ear. "I'm going to get you out of here tonight, both of you." She pulled back slightly, just enough to look at my face. Her expression asked a question she couldn't say out loud. I held up a finger. 1 moment. Then I pointed toward the back wall of the carriage house, toward the deep shadow beyond the empty shelving, where the room extended further than the camera's angle could reach. And I pointed down. "There's something else back there." Claire's eyes filled immediately. She pressed her lips together hard, gave a single tiny nod. I moved toward the back wall, staying low, staying out of the camera's sightline until I reached the place where the room ended, or almost ended. Because in the far back corner, half hidden behind an old tarp and a stack of collapsed cardboard boxes, was a door I hadn't noticed when I first came in. Small, interior, flush with the wall, with a brand new padlock on it, the same brand as the one on the main entrance. I looked back at the keyring Rosa had given me, 2 keys on it. I'd used one on the main door. I reached for the second. The second key was smaller than the first. It turned smoothly, and somehow that made it worse. A well-maintained lock meant someone opened this door regularly, deliberately, with purpose. I pushed it inward slowly, and the smell changed immediately. Still damp, still close, but underneath the must was something else entirely. The faint sweetness of child shampoo, the warm, yeasty scent of a small body recently asleep. I stopped breathing. 8 feet by 8 feet. A storage closet originally with the shelving removed and a low plywood platform screwed to the floor. On the platform, a sleeping bag printed with faded cartoon rockets zipped halfway. A plastic cup with a lid and straw from what looked like a Wendy's. 3 picture books in the corner, a flashlight with a cracked lens. And in the sleeping bag, curled on his side with both fists tucked under his chin, was a small boy. Sandy hair that needed cutting flopped across his forehead in sleep. Cheeks flushed with the particular warmth of deep sleep. One arm wrapped around a stuffed bear missing its left eye, repaired along one seam with electrical tape, the kind you find in a construction worker's kit. I recognized the tape. I kept a roll of it in my truck. I stood in the doorway looking at this boy I had never seen before in my life and felt something shift in my chest, a physical sensation, like a room I didn't know existed, opening a door I hadn't known was closed. I looked back at Claire. She had crossed the carriage house without a sound and was standing 3 feet behind me, arms wrapped around her own ribs, eyes fixed on the sleeping bag with the expression I remembered from the day Margaret died, watching the person you love most, and being able to do nothing except watch. "Claire, who is he?" Her eyes were streaming, tears running without her seeming to notice. She pressed her fingers over her mouth. "He's mine," she breathed. "His name is Tommy." The room tilted. I put one hand on the doorframe. "How old is 5-6 in March? March 4th. I didn't know how I knew that, but the date arrived with total certainty before she finished the sentence. "Marcus knows," she said before I could ask. The words came out flat and drained. "He told me if I said a word to anyone, the staff, anyone, he'd take Tommy somewhere. I'd never find him. 3 states, people who owed him favors." Her voice cracked and she stopped, started again. "I kept signing the papers, Dad. Every time I almost stopped, I looked at that door and I signed." I turned back to the boy. Tommy, my grandson, sleeping in a converted closet with a one-eyed bear and a Wendy's cup, because that was the world built around him while I was 1,400 miles away, telling myself I was keeping a promise. A memory came uninvited. Margaret in a hospital room 32 years ago, holding newborn Claire against her chest, looking up at me with an expression I had spent decades trying to name accurately. Not happiness exactly. Recognition, like she was meeting someone she'd been expecting for a very long time. I looked at Tommy's jaw, the slope of his nose, wide palms, short fingers even in sleep. Builder's hands. Margaret had always called mine that. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth. 1 tear. I allowed exactly 1, hot against my skin, wiped away immediately. Not yet. Camera still running. Marcus still watching. Work still to do. I pulled the door almost shut to block the camera's sightline and turned back to Claire. "He doesn't know who I am," I said. "He knows he has a grandfather." Claire's jaw tightened. "Marcus told him you died before he was born, said you were a hero, died saving someone on a construction site." She looked at me. "He wanted Tommy to have someone to be proud of, someone who couldn't contradict the story." I stood very still with that. Marcus had given my grandson a heroic dead grandfather, sealed with enough sentiment that questioning it would feel like desecration, almost elegant in its cruelty. What do we do? Claire's grip on my arm was stronger than her frame suggested, the grip of someone who has held on through things that should have made holding on impossible. "I make one phone call, then I need you to trust me for 1 hour. I've trusted you my whole life. I know." I covered her hand with mine. "I'm sorry it took me this long to be worth it." She made a sound small and voluntary and pressed her forehead against my shoulder for one moment. Then she straightened, pulled herself together with that terrible practice speed, and went back to the mattress without another word. I moved through the carriage house, staying low below the camera's angle, reached the main door, stepped into the cold November air. I reached for my watch, pressed the recessed button on the case back installed 3 years ago, after a situation in Tacoma I'd rather not discuss. The face flipped open on a hinge. Inside a basic phone, 6 buttons, 1, contact. I pressed call. 1 ring. "Mr. Hale." Cole Rafferty's voice, low, precise, the voice of a man who processes information the way other people process oxygen. "We lost your GPS 4 hours and 12 minutes ago. Search protocol was 22 minutes from activation. Stand it down. I need you in Pasadena, all of it. Define all of it. Alpha Team, Stuart Brack, Dominic Ferre, and Cole Contact Agent Donna Reyes, FBI Financial Crimes, not local law enforcement, not the sheriff's office." A beat. "The sheriff is on the guest list for the party currently happening inside my house. Timeline, 45 minutes. We'll be there in 40. The line went dead. I stood in the dark garden with the watch phone in my palm and violin music threading over the wall, and thought about a 5-year-old boy asleep in a rocket ship sleeping bag who had been told his grandfather was a hero who died saving someone. Not yet, I thought, but give me an hour. They came in 4 vehicles, no headlights on the last 50 yards, 4 black Suburbans rolling into the service alley with the precision of people who understood that the difference between noticed and unnoticed was usually just speed and light. Cole stepped out of the lead vehicle and looked at me, the way he always looked after something went sideways. A rapid damage assessment, eyes moving from my face to the torn knee to the dried blood on my lip. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you, Cole. The lip is new. Guard at the front gate." He nodded once. Filed, it didn't dwell. "Stuart and Dominic are in Vehicle 3. Agent Reyes has a mobile unit 2 blocks east. She's waiting on a signal." Stuart Brack climbed out carrying a briefcase I knew contained approximately 14 pounds of organized documentation and enough legal firepower to make a sitting judge uncomfortable. He shook my hand without preamble and said, "Tell me what we're working with." I gave him 12 minutes. He wrote without interrupting. Dominic Ferre was already moving toward the service entrance backpack equipment case catering uniform, the unhurried confidence of a man who had spent 9 years entering rooms he wasn't supposed to be in. 20 minutes, he said without looking back. "Rosa texted me the office location 6 minutes after you spoke to her." Cole looked at the middle distance. "Go," I said. Dominic was back in 18 minutes. He opened his laptop on the hood and talked without preamble the way he always did, level precise, giving nothing away except the facts. Death certificate filed April 14th, 2019. Signed by Judge Harold Weiss, currently suspended from the bench pending a DOJ investigation into accepting payments for favorable probate rulings. Conservatorship supported by Dr. Philip Auerbach, whose California medical license was revoked 7 months after he signed Claire's evaluation 3rd falsification case. Insurance $752,000. Northwestern Mutual paid to a joint account April 2019. Dispersed across carrying costs, luxury vehicles, a Nevada gambling account, and capitalization deposits to a Delaware LLC called Cole Heritage Ventures, doing business as the Hale Legacy Foundation. Operating account, a private Cayman Islands bank. Current balance $2.3 million. Funded by bridge loans secured against this property from 3 lenders. One of them, a Las Vegas private individual with documented organized crime connections. The loan comes due in 19 days. Tonight's event is the closing act. Claire donates the property publicly. The foundation sells it for 18 million loans, get repaid, profit disappears behind corporate layers before anyone looks twice. Tommy, I said. Thomas Walter Hale, born March 4th, 2019, Cedars Sinai. Father line on the birth certificate blank. Dominic met my eyes. Marcus Vane has never filed for paternity guardianship or appeared on any legal document connected to the child. His current physical custody of that boy is not custody. It's detention. Stewart said, false imprisonment of a minor. The word landed in the Suburban like a dropped weight. We have enough, Stewart said. I can have federal charges filed before midnight. We call Reyes now execute a search warrant. No? I looked at the warm light in the house windows. The violin had been joined by a cello. 300 people are in that room. They trusted him, donated to his foundation, believed his story. I turned back. He built this in public, Stewart. Every dinner, every memorial speech, every charity event. He deserves to lose it the same way. Stewart studied me. That's not the legally conservative approach. I'm not a legally conservative person. You'll need an emergency surveillance order to make the stream admissible. Can you get one? He was already reaching for his phone. I know a magistrate in the Central District. Give me 15 minutes. Cole tapped the window. I cracked it. 12, Cole said. Marcus just moved up the schedule. Claire takes the stage in 53 minutes. Stewart looked at his phone, then at me. 12 minutes, he said, and dialed. Stewart got his surveillance order in 11 minutes. He dropped back into the Suburban and said, Magistrate Judge Carol Finch, Central District. Emergency order granted at 9:02. Everything through Claire's transmitter goes directly to Agent Reyes. Fully admissible. Carol Finch, I said. I built a parking structure for her husband's company in 2017. Stewart looked at me with the expression of a man who has heard too much. Please never tell me things like that. Completely legitimate contract. I believe you. Still never tell me. He reached into his briefcase and produced 1 page on Northwestern Mutual stationery, close enough to pass a fast read, wrong enough in its serial numbers that serious scrutiny would expose it. A supplemental benefit clause, $12 million released to the foundation if Claire appeared publicly confirmed my death and signed the transfer documents before midnight. He'll check, I said. He'll want to check, Stewart said. A man with 19 days until his Las Vegas loan comes due and $12 million on the table doesn't check carefully. He checks fast. Cole appeared at the window. I cracked it. Dominic's out. He had 40 seconds with Claire. The transmitter. In place. Brooch on the neckline is the camera. Button on her left sleeve is audio. A pause. She asked him one question. What question? Whether you were still outside. The tightness came back to my throat. What did he tell her? 40 feet away. Hadn't moved. Cole looked at me steadily. She nodded and didn't say anything else. I looked at the house. Send the letter. Stewart forwarded it to Marcus's personal email, followed by a text from a shell number Dominic had registered in the previous 20 minutes. Letter sent supplemental policy benefit. Time sensitive. Tonight only. We watched Dominic's laptop. He had remote access to the property's Wi-Fi, another detail from his 40 seconds inside. 47 seconds after the text, Marcus opened the email. He's reading it, Dominic said. Outside, somewhere beyond the wall, a car door closed. A woman laughed at something in the November air. He's reading it again. 90 seconds later, Marcus called the callback number. Dominic picked up his secondary device. His voice shifted completely slightly higher. Midwestern, the practiced neutrality of someone who has been many different people on the phone. Northwestern Mutual Policy Services. This is Greg speaking. Marcus's voice came through tight and precise. He read the policy number. Dominic had the match ready. Marcus asked whether the benefit lapsed if Claire didn't sign before midnight. That's correct, Dominic said. It cannot be reinstated. A pause, shorter than the first one. Thank you, that's all I needed. The line went dead. Dominic set the device down. He believed it. He wanted to believe it, Stewart said. Different thing. 6 minutes later, Dominic's monitoring showed a text from Marcus to Sylvia's cell. Bring her in. Clean her up. The white dress, 45 minutes. Then, a second text, unknown recipient, move Claire's portion to 9:15. Tell Boyd we're starting early. 9:15, Cole said. 31 minutes. It's enough, I said. In the carriage house, Sylvia delivered the dress herself. 2 women in black came with a garment bag and a cosmetics case, and the kind of efficiency that made the whole thing feel like the wrong version of getting ready for something. Sylvia watched from the center of the room while they worked arms folded with the proprietary attention of someone preparing an asset. The dress was white, floor length, expensive, the kind that photographs well in candlelight. When they finished, Sylvia walked a slow circle around Claire, adjusting, inspecting, tilting her chin up with 2 fingers. Then she leaned close. You read exactly what Marcus gives you. You confirm your father passed away 6 years ago. You signed the transfer documents. The pleasant voice. The one Claire had learned meant the most danger. One wrong word, and Tommy's door gets locked from the outside for a week. Claire told me later she'd looked at Sylvia's face and understood something new. Sylvia wasn't threatening her because she was cruel. She was threatening her because she was afraid. Something had shifted in the past 30 minutes that Sylvia couldn't name yet, and the only tool she had when she was afraid was control. I understand, Claire said. She did. Just not in the way Sylvia meant. What Sylvia didn't know was that Dominic's 40 seconds had been enough for 2 things. The button on the left sleeve seam wireless audio transmitter, matte black, indistinguishable from the dress's original buttons. The brooch at the neckline, an identical replacement containing a pinhole camera, transmitting at 30 frames per second, directly to Agent Donna Reyes, 2 blocks east on California Boulevard. In the 30 seconds before that, he had done something else. He had taken Claire's right hand, wrapped her fingers around her own left wrist, and shown her one motion, a single rotation inward toward the thumb of whoever was holding her, the weakest point of any grip. One move, he said. Into the thumb. Pull, that's all. She practiced it twice. It took 4 seconds each time. In his last 3 seconds, Dominic had pressed Claire's hand around her own left wrist and said, with the flat precision of someone delivering a fact, Your father is 40 feet away and hasn't moved. You don't have to perform tonight. You just have to tell the truth. Then he was gone. Cole found me at the alley gate when Stewart's phone confirmed the signal was clean. 17 minutes, Walter. I was still in the work jacket, still in the torn jeans. Cole had offered a suit dark Italian cut the kind I wore to close deals. I'd thought about it for 30 seconds and decided against it. The man Marcus's guards had put on the ground tonight was wearing this jacket. That man was walking into that room. I didn't need a suit to prove who I was. Let's go over the sequence, I said. On your signal, Dominic cuts power. 40 seconds of darkness. Our people secure exits. Lights come back under our control. Dominic runs the screens. And Claire, I said. Cole was quiet for a moment. Claire knows what to do. The rest is hers. I looked at the gate. Then we wait for her, I said. Before I tell you what Claire did at that microphone comment, the number 7, right now, if you're still with me. I want to know you're here before everything changes. A note, the story ahead contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. It may not reflect events exactly as they occurred. If that's not something you'd like to continue with, this is a good place to stop. No judgment. Dominic had the house feed up on his laptop before Marcus's event coordinator finished adjusting the new schedule. The camera was one of the property's own, a security unit mounted above the ballroom's north entrance, positioned to cover the full width of the room. Dominic had rerouted its output in the same 40 seconds he'd spent inside, and now it was showing us in clear, high-definition color exactly what 300 people in formal black clothing were looking at. The ballroom was not a room I recognized. I had designed this space as a great room, open functional, with exposed beam ceilings and wide plank floors and enough natural light that you never felt like you were indoors. The room in the feed had been transformed into something that had no relationship to what I'd built. Crystal chandeliers hung where I'd installed simple pendant lights. Floral arrangements the size of small trees occupied the corners. A stage had been constructed against the north wall, raised 18 inches with black skirting, and a podium and a projection screen behind it, currently displaying a large format photograph of my face. The photograph was the same one from the banner, me squinting in Oregon summer sunlight, looking at someone behind the camera, with what I now recognized looking at it on a laptop screen in an alley in Pasadena as simple, uncomplicated happiness. I looked away from it. Quincy Aldred, Dominic said, moving the cursor to indicate a man in the third row from the front. 72, semi-retired, commercial real estate primarily. He and Marcus have had a business relationship for approximately 4 years. He's one of the foundation's larger prospective donors. He was also a client of Hale Industrial in 2015 and 2016. I looked at the man on the screen. Silver hair, three-piece suit, the particular upright posture of someone who had decided decades ago how he wanted to carry himself and had never stopped. He was looking at the photograph on the projection screen with an expression that didn't match the room around him. Everyone else was tilted toward quiet grief. The performative solemnity of people at an event they've been told is solemn. Quincy was frowning. A small private frown, the kind that means a calculation is running in the background and the numbers aren't quite adding up. He knew me, I said. Enough to recognize your face, Dominic confirmed. Whether he'd recognize it on a 62-year-old man in a work jacket is a separate question. I filed that away. On the screen, Reverend Charles Boyd approached the podium. He was a tall man, 70 or so, with the kind of bearing that came from 50 years of standing in front of congregations, comfortable with being looked at, unhurried in his movements, voice already carrying before the room had finished settling. Marcus introduced him to me as a family friend, Cole said from the passenger seat. But according to what Rosa told Dominic, Boyd was hired 4 weeks ago through a speakers bureau. He's never been inside this house before tonight. He doesn't know what Walter Hale looks like. He was given a biographical brief in a program. A man who had never met me hired to memorialize me reading from notes. I thought about what Margaret would have said about that. Something dry and precise and accurate. She'd had a talent for reducing absurdity to its essential sentence. On the laptop screen, Reverend Boyd adjusted the microphone and looked out at the room. "We gather tonight," he said, "to remember a man who built things that lasted. Walter James Hale understood as few people truly do, that what we leave behind us matters more than what we accumulate while we're here." 300 people listened. Some nodded. A woman in the fourth row pressed a handkerchief to her eye. I watched from an alley 200 feet away, in a jacket that still had dried mud on the left sleeve. "He's good," Stewart said. "He believes what he's saying," I said. "That's the difference." Boyd spoke for 8 minutes. I knew because I timed it. He spoke about legacy and community and the particular loneliness of grief, and none of it was wrong exactly. It simply had nothing to do with me. It was a speech about a man named Walter Hale, who didn't exist, delivered with the sincerity of someone who had no idea he was eulogizing a fiction. When he finished, the applause was genuine. I could hear it through Dominic's audio feed, not the polite rhythmic applause of people fulfilling a social obligation, but the slightly uneven, spontaneous kind that means people actually felt something. Marcus had chosen his speaker well. Marcus came to the podium next. He had changed something small about his appearance since I'd seen him at the gate. The pocket square was different. A darker fold, more formal. The foundation pin on his lapel caught the light from the chandeliers. He set his notes on the podium, looked up at the room, and waited exactly the right number of seconds for the applause to fully die before he spoke. Walter Hale taught me, he said, that a man's character is visible in the smallest choices he makes, not the big moments the contracts signed. The buildings raised the headlines, the small ones. A pause. The way he'd stop whatever he was doing when Claire walked into the room. The way he talked about her mother. The way he believed without reservation that the people he loved were capable of more than they knew. His voice caught on the last sentence. Not dramatically, just enough. I watched his face on the screen. The grief was impeccably performed, present enough to be moving, controlled enough to be dignified. He had, I realized, almost certainly practiced this in front of a mirror. 6 years ago, Marcus continued, I made a promise to Claire and to Walter's memory that whatever happened, whatever we had to face, I would make sure this family's legacy survived. He looked down briefly, then back up. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce the first step in that commitment, the Hale Legacy Foundation. The applause this time was longer. Quincy Aldred applauded with everyone else, but his eyes had moved from Marcus to the projection screen and back to Marcus, with the expression of someone trying to reconcile two slightly incompatible data sets. And now, Marcus said, the person without whom none of this would be possible, the strongest woman I know, my wife Claire. He stepped back from the podium and extended his hand toward the right wing of the stage. On Dominic's screen, I watched Claire walk out. The white dress moved well under the stage lighting. Whoever had chosen it had known what they were doing. Her hair had been arranged simply, which was either the stylist's good judgment or a concession to the fact that there wasn't much to work with. She held a single sheet of paper in both hands. She looked from the camera angle above the north entrance exactly like what Marcus needed her to look, like a woman, fragile with grief, composed by effort, present because love required it. I knew what she actually was. I had felt the grip of her hand on my arm in a dark carriage house 40 minutes ago. Marcus placed his hand on her shoulder as she reached the podium, a light touch, intimate, husbandly. For the camera, for the room, for the 300 people who were watching with the attentive sympathy of an audience that had already decided how the story went. Claire set her paper on the podium. She looked at it. The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that forms around a moment everyone can feel is significant without knowing yet what it signifies. Quincy Aldred was no longer looking at the stage. He was looking at something just beyond the stage, the door on the north side of the ballroom that led to the service corridor, the one I would be coming through in approximately 3 minutes if everything went the way it was supposed to go. He was frowning again, deeper this time. On the screen, Claire's hands were still on the paper. "Whenever you're ready," Marcus said, close enough to the microphone that it picked up his voice, low and encouraging and completely in control. Claire lifted her head. She looked directly into the camera above the north entrance, the one Dominic had rerouted, the one feeding to our laptop in the alley, the one that was also feeding to Agent Donna Reyes 2 blocks east. She looked straight into it, the way you look at someone when you want to be sure they hear you. And she put the paper down. "My father," she said, "is not dead." The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. I know because I counted sitting in the alley with Dominic's laptop balanced on my knees, watching my daughter stand at a podium in a white dress in a room full of people who had just had the ground pulled out from under everything they thought they were here for. 4 seconds. Then the room erupted. Not in the way rooms erupt in films, not a roar, not chaos, not immediately. It started as a murmur, the way a fault line starts as a tremor, and Marcus was already moving before it had fully registered, already reaching for the microphone, already recalibrating. "She's been under enormous stress," he began. "His name is Walter Hale." Claire said louder, now her voice steady in a way that I knew, having heard her voice through a carriage house door 30 minutes ago, had cost her something. "He's alive. He came home tonight, and every person in this room has been lied to." Marcus's hand closed around the microphone stand. Cole said from the front seat, "Now." I was already opening the door. "Now," I said. The north corridor was exactly as I remembered it. Narrower than the main hallways, wood-paneled with a dog leg, at the 30-foot mark, where the original structure met the addition I'd built in 2009, the music room addition, 3 weekends of arguing about window placement until the architect found a clear story solution that made everyone happy. I moved through it fast, staying close to the wall, past the music room door, closed dark underneath, toward the sound of a room that had stopped being a memorial service. Cole was 6 feet behind me. Dominic was at the power board in the basement. Stuart was holding outside the south entrance with the documents. I reached the ballroom door and stopped. Through it I could hear Marcus's voice, still controlled, still working, but with something underneath it now that hadn't been there before. A vibration. The specific frequency of a man maintaining composure through force of will rather than genuine calm. "Claire has been in treatment for a complex grief response." "Let me through," I said to Cole. 10 seconds. Dominic needs 10 seconds. I put my hand on the door and waited. Inside, Claire had stepped back from the podium. She told me later that the step wasn't retreat. She'd moved to create space between herself and Marcus's hand on her shoulder, the hand she'd learned to read as both a claim and a warning. Without it, she said she felt the absence like a released pressure. "His name is Walter Hale." She said, stronger on the second pass, finding something underneath the fear that the fear had been sitting on top of for a long time. "He's 62 years old. He came home tonight because today is my birthday. He wanted to give me something that belonged to my mother. He got here and found this." She gestured at the room, the chandeliers, the flowers, the projection screen showing his face. "When he tried to tell the truth, the men at the front gate put him on the ground. The murmur had teeth now. Quincy Aldred was on his feet. "Marcus," he said, voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "I was in Portland in February of 2019. Walter Hale walked me through the Burnside Bridge project personally. He was alive, healthy, and told me he was planning to drive down for Easter." He looked at the screen. "That photograph was taken no earlier than 2017. I recognized the job site." The room shifted. The way a tide shifts a collective redistribution of weight that changes the direction of everything. "He's lying," Marcus said, to the room. "Whatever this woman has told him." The lights went out. Every chandelier, every sconce, every pin light gone in the same instant. 300 people stood in total darkness for exactly the time it takes to draw one breath. Then emergency lighting came on, pale and indirect, and the projection screen stayed active. Dominic was running it now. My photograph disappeared. In its place, a small concrete room, a mattress on the floor, a woman sitting cross-legged with her hands in her lap, her head at the angle of someone who has learned that a particular posture makes the next few minutes bearable. Sylvia's voice came through the speakers. "Stand up, shoulders back, let me see your hands." The woman stood, moved through each position with the compliance of someone whose body performs the sequence before the mind catches up. The room watching was absolutely still, 300 people holding glasses and programs, none of them moving, all of them watching with the frozen attention of people witnessing something they cannot categorize. "Now sit, hands in your lap, head up." A plate appeared at the edge of the frame, set on the floor with the casualness of someone putting down a water bowl. "Your behavior this week has been adequate, not good, adequate." Someone made a sound, not a word. The kind that comes out when the body reacts before the mind finishes processing. Then Marcus's voice from a different recording, entirely a phone conversation patched through Cole's system. "After tonight, the house is sold. We move her somewhere no one will find her. Give it a year. These things take care of themselves if you're patient." A woman near the back pressed her hand over her mouth. Her husband put his arm around her and looked at Marcus. Marcus had stopped talking. He was looking at the screen with an expression I had never seen on his face, not at the gate tonight, not anywhere. The expression of someone watching a structure they've spent years building come apart in real time, understanding there are no more moves. Then Sylvia stepped onto the stage. She reached Marcus at the podium and put her hand on his arm. "We need to leave," she said, low and urgent. The microphone caught it. "There's nowhere to go," Marcus said. Then, because 3 minutes of shock had eroded something load-bearing inside him, "This is your fault." Sylvia's hand tightened. "What did you just say to me?" "I said this is your fault." His voice broke the surface now, uneven and raw. "I told you to keep her quiet. You turned it into..." He gestured at the screen. "That. You forged the death certificate." Sylvia said each word separately, the pleasantness stripped entirely away, something older and harder underneath. "The insurance you, the judge you, the doctor you paid him. I never met him. All I did was what you asked me to do." "All you did," Marcus said with a laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever, "was put your hands on her, every single day for 3 years. You think that distinction matters? It matters to me. Then I hope it keeps you warm." Reverend Boyd walked to the podium. He placed himself between them, with the quiet authority of a man who understood this was the only thing he could still do that mattered. "I was told this was a memorial service," he said to the room. "I prepared remarks in good faith." He looked at Marcus, then at Sylvia. "I don't know what I'm standing in the middle of, but I won't stand here anymore." He stepped down. Quincy Aldred moved into the aisle. He didn't raise his voice. The room had reached the particular quiet of 300 people, all deciding the same thing simultaneously. "I've known Walter Hale for over 20 years, he said. "I watched you grieve a living man. I watched you use his name to raise money from people who trusted you." He buttoned his jacket, small, deliberate, final. "Whatever happens next, it happens without me." He walked toward the south exit. 2 people followed, then 4, then a table of 8, chair legs scraping the floor, programs set down on tablecloths. The exodus was not dramatic, steady and quiet and final, the way things end when people have made up their minds. Marcus watched from the podium, still upright. But something structural had given way, the kind that doesn't show from the outside until everything depending on it starts to shift. The room held maybe 140 people now. "Thank you both." I stepped through the north ballroom door into the light. That was the last piece of evidence we were still missing. 140 pairs of eyes turned toward the north entrance. The rest had already voted with their feet. I walked from the door to the center of the room, in the kind of quiet that has the quiet of people who have watched something collapse and are still deciding what the rubble means. My boots made sound on the hardwood floors. I'd laid myself in 2012, a week after the flooring contractor walked off over a payment dispute, and I'd driven to the lumber yard and done it myself, because the house needed floors and waiting wasn't an option. The floors were good. They'd held up well. Marcus was still at the podium. He watched me cross the room, with an expression that had cycled through several things in the past 30 seconds, and landed on performance the deliberate reconstruction of composure, assembled piece by piece in real time, like watching someone build a wall while standing on the wrong side of it. "This man," he said into the microphone with a steadiness that cost him something, "is not who he's claiming to be. He appeared at the gate earlier this evening, disoriented, agitated, making the same claims. Security asked him to leave. What you're watching is the second attempt." I kept walking. I reached the center of the room and stopped beneath the chandelier. The light caught everything: the mud still on my left sleeve, the torn knee, the split in my lip, dried and pulling when I moved my mouth. I was aware of what I looked like. I had decided in the alley that this was exactly right. "My name is Walter James Hale," I said. "I'm 62 years old. I've been alive continuously since 1962, which makes the death certificate filed in this county in April of 2019 factually inaccurate." I looked at Marcus. "You know that. Everyone here is about to know it too." "He's lying," Marcus said. The wall was holding barely. "He's a very convincing—" "Stewart," I said. Stewart Brack came through the south entrance, carrying his briefcase and a device the size of a paperback book, a biometric verification unit, the kind financial institutions and government contractors use for field identity confirmation. He'd carried it from Portland as a standard precaution. He set it on the nearest table. A couple in their 60s leaned back simultaneously to give him room. "This device," Stewart said, in the voice he used in courtrooms, clear, unhurried, the voice of someone who has decided that confidence is contagious and has made a professional choice about which to spread, performs multi-layer biometric identification. Fingerprint mapping against federal and state databases. Iris scan cross-referenced against passport and financial institution records. 45 seconds. I placed my right thumb on the reader. The machine processed in silence. 45 seconds of the room not breathing. Then the screen lit up. Hale Walter James. Dobb, March 14th, 1962. Passport, valid expires 2027. Last, verified biometric match, Portland or November 2nd, 2024. Hale Industrial Group, CEO, federal tax. Filing current through 2023. Stewart turned the screen to face the room. "Mr. Hale has filed federal income taxes every year for 40 years, including the 6 years during which Marcus Vane represented to an insurance company and a probate court that he was deceased." He produced a single page from his briefcase. "DNA samples were collected at 9:17 this evening. Results in 48 hours. But this biometric record has never been disputed, sealed, or inconsistent. It was simply never checked." The couple who had leaned back looked at each other. Marcus had stepped away from the microphone. Something in the architecture of his face had shifted, a settling the way buildings settle after a significant load is removed, and what remained was thinner, less certain of its own dimensions. "Quincy," I said. Quincy Aldred was still in the room, standing near the bar that no one was using hands in his jacket pockets expression, doing the work of a 72-year-old man, absorbing information that retroactively restructures what he thought he knew. "February of 2019, he said. "We walked the full span of the Burnside Bridge. You were worried about the expansion joint tolerance on the east approach. You were right, they redid it the following summer." He looked at my face directly. "You have the same scar above your left eye that you had that day. You told me a falling bolt Tacoma job site." 3 years ago, I said. 3 years after you were supposed to be dead." Quincy turned to the stage. "I was prepared to give this foundation a significant amount of money, Marcus, because I believed what you told me it stood for." He buttoned his jacket, small, deliberate, the gesture of a man closing a door. "I'll be speaking to my attorneys in the morning." He walked out without looking back. The woman who'd pressed her hands flat on the table stood. Her companion stood with her. They left without a word, which was exactly right. Marcus watched the room empty further around him and said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something more fundamental, the expression of a person who has realized the story they've been living has ended, and there is no sequel. "You have no idea what it cost," he said. Not to the room, to me. Every month, every transfer. You left. You sent money and thought that was enough. The money was never enough. There was nothing there. Stop. Claire's voice came from the left wing. She had slipped back through the service entrance while everyone's attention was on us. She stood at the edge of the stage, arms at her sides, entirely still. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of someone who has finished being afraid. "Don't explain it," she said to Marcus. "There's nothing you can say that changes what you did. You didn't fill a gap, you made one, and you put me and my son in it." Marcus looked at his wife. Whatever had been there the last time, she was someone whose responses he could predict it wasn't there anymore. He looked away first. Agent Reyes handed Marcus to the two agents behind her with a brief professional nod, and they took him out the south door, the way people are removed from rooms when the conversation is finished, not roughly, not gently, with the efficiency of a process that has moved past the point where the subject's preferences matter. The door closed. I was at the edge of the stage when Cole's voice came through my earpiece. "Sylvia's moving, east side, back garden. She's not heading for the exits." I understood immediately. The carriage house. The cabinet Rosa had mentioned, passport cash. Whatever a person packs for the version of their life where everything has gone wrong. "Cole." "Already on it. Reyes has 2 agents there since 9 o'clock. "Tommy." "Martinez pulled him out 11 minutes ago while the ballroom was dark. He's in vehicle 2. He's awake." A pause, the operational tone shifting slightly. "He's eating a granola bar and asking Martinez why his truck is so clean." A sound came out of me that wasn't quite a laugh, something adjacent to one. "We got the bear too," Cole said. "Martinez went back for it." I pressed my hand briefly against my eyes. Sylvia reached the carriage house at 9:58. She moved through the back garden at a pace that wasn't quite running, the contained urgency of a woman who had spent 65 years understanding that running signals panic and panic signals weakness. She went through the open door without pausing, assumed one of Marcus's people had come through before her, and made it to the cabinet behind the old shelving before the 4 agents who had been waiting since 9 o'clock came from 3 directions simultaneously. Cole told me this later in the parking lot. He said she'd had her hand on the cabinet handle when the lights came on. She stood still for a moment. Then she straightened her back, smoothed her blouse, and turned to face the agents with the composed expression of a woman at a social function. "I'd like to speak to my attorney," she said. Cole said it was the most composed thing he'd heard anyone say under those circumstances in 22 years. He did not say it with admiration. Back in the ballroom, I found Claire. She was on the stage steps, not on the stage, 3 steps from the bottom, in the particular in-between space that children find instinctively when they need to be somewhere that isn't quite either place. She'd taken off the heels and set them side by side on the step below her, bare feet on the hardwood floor, hands in her lap. Dr. Anita Marsh was crouched in front of her. Anita was 45, a forensic psychologist contracted by the FBI for field assessment in prolonged captivity cases. Stewart had called her from the alley at 8:47. She'd arrived at 9:22 with a medical bag and no evident opinion about the 40 minutes notice. I hung back far enough not to intrude. "Your cognitive function is fully intact," Anita was saying. "What you did tonight at that podium required significant independent volition. You understood the stakes and acted anyway. That matters clinically and legally." "I knew what I was doing," Claire said. "I've known for a long time. I just couldn't see a way to do it and keep Tommy safe at the same time. And tonight, someone built me one." She looked up past Anita at me. She had known I was there. I came forward and sat beside her on the step. The stage lights were still on above us, throwing warm light across the empty ballroom, abandoned glasses, flower arrangements that cost more than some people's monthly rent. All of it designed for an occasion that hadn't turned out to be the occasion it was designed for. "Tommy's safe," I said. "He's in the car eating a granola bar and interrogating Cole's driver about truck cleanliness standards." A sound came out of Claire, short surprise, the kind of laugh that happens before a person decides whether they're going to laugh. It resolved into something more complicated, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. He asks questions about everything, she said, voice unsteady. He doesn't understand why anyone would own something they don't keep clean. Smart kid. He's so smart. The unsteadiness broke on the last word, and she tipped forward and put her forehead against my shoulder. I put my arm around her. Still too thin, 3 years of insufficient nutrition doesn't reverse in a week. But she was warm and breathing and on the steps of her own house, making sounds that meant grief and relief and exhaustion, and something not quite yet hope, but close enough to count. When the worst of it had passed, I opened the wooden box. The star pendant caught the stage light and threw a small point of brightness against the step. "Mom's," she whispered. "She wanted you to have it at 30. I'm 2 years late." Claire lifted the chain and held it up the way she'd held it in the carriage house, turning it slowly, watching the star rotate in the light. "Help me put it on." My hands were clumsy with the clasp, not built for small work, but I got it. She touched the star once with her fingertips. "Is he going to ask who I brought home?" she said. "When we get to the car?" "Probably." "What do I tell him?" I thought about a 5-year-old boy who had been told his grandfather was a hero who died before he was born. "Tell him the truth," I said. "Tell him Grandpa came home." Claire leaned her head against my shoulder. Cole appeared in the north doorway. Anita gave him a small nod. "Whenever you're ready," Cole said. Claire lifted her head, stood up. She didn't put the heels back on, picked them up in one hand, and walked across the hardwood floor in bare feet through the empty ballroom toward the north door and her son. I picked up the wooden box, empty now, the necklace where it was supposed to be, and followed her out. Tommy was sitting in the third row of the Suburban, with his seatbelt on and his bear in his lap when Claire opened the door. He looked at her, then at me standing behind her. "Mama," he said, "who's that man?" Claire crouched down to his level. The star pendant caught the light from the SUV's interior. Tommy reached out immediately and touched it one finger, curious, careful. "That's my dad," Claire said. "Your grandpa." Tommy considered this with the seriousness that 5-year-olds apply to genuinely important information. He looked at me again, reassessing. "I thought you were dead," he said. "I know," I said. "I wasn't." "Oh." He thought about it. "Okay. Then, do you want to hold Bear? He helps when things are confusing." He held the one-eyed stuffed animal out toward me with both hands, an offering completely sincere. Something happened in my chest that I didn't have a name for. I took the bear, held it for a moment, handed it back. "Thank you," I said. "I feel better already." Tommy nodded, satisfied, and moved over to make room. Stewart handled the legal paperwork in the parking lot of the property, using the hood of Vehicle 3 as a desk, while Agent Reyes coordinated with her team over the radio. The charges against Marcus were filed within the hour. Insurance fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1033 wire, fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343-72, counts 1 for each monthly transfer. He'd intercepted forgery of legal documents, conservatorship fraud, and false imprisonment of both Claire and Tommy. Minimum exposure, Stewart said, was 22 years in federal prison. Sylvia faced false imprisonment, organized abuse conspiracy, and attempted flight. Her attorney arrived at 11:15 and said nothing useful. Judge Harold Weiss, the probate judge, who had signed both the death certificate and the conservatorship order, was referred to the Department of Justice, where he was already the subject of an ongoing investigation. The referral, Stewart said, would not help him. The Hale Legacy Foundation was frozen by federal order before midnight. The purchase agreement for $18 million was voided. The property remained in Walter Hale's name, which meant legally it had never left. Stewart produced the quitclaim deed from his briefcase. He'd had it prepared before the evening began. He said this without apology. "I was optimistic," he said. "I signed it on the hood of the car, transferring full legal ownership of the property to Claire Marie Hale in the presence of Stewart Brack and Agent Donna Reyes as witnesses. Stewart had his notary stamp in the briefcase because of course he did. Claire was in the SUV with Tommy when I signed. I didn't call her over. It could wait until morning. The piece of paper, the explanation, all of it. Tonight she had her son in her lap and her mother's necklace at her throat, and that was enough for one night. It was enough for several nights." At 11:45, the last of the FBI vehicles left Oak Knoll Drive. Cole found me standing at the front gate looking at the place where the banner had been. 2 of his people had taken it down during the proceedings, rolled it up, removed the cables left. 2 clean bolt holes in the iron posts where the mounting hardware had been. The gate was just a gate again. "Where are you taking them tonight?" Cole asked. "Hotel," I said. "Something with a pool. Tommy asked about a pool." He asked Martinez about the pool at the Four Seasons. Martinez told him about the Four Seasons. Martinez told him pools were for people who earned them. Cole paused. Tommy said he'd earned one. I looked at the gate, at the 2 bolt holes, at the place where my face had been 6 hours ago, declaring me dead. "He has?" I said. Cole nodded, put his hands in his pockets. "Good night, Walter," he said. "Good night, Cole." He walked back to the lead vehicle. I stayed at the gate another minute, looking at nothing in particular. The empty street, the sycamore leaves on the pavement, the yellow light from the house still burning in the front windows. Then I went to get my family. Tommy fell asleep at 11:51 at night. I know because I was sitting in the chair by the window when it happened, watching him on the king-size bed, still in the clothes he'd worn all evening. Bear tucked under his chin, the granola bar wrapper he'd refused to throw away, sticking out of his jacket pocket. One moment he was explaining to Bear the structural differences between the Four Seasons pool and what he imagined an FBI pool would look like. The next moment he was simply asleep mid-sentence the way children go, under completely and without negotiation. Claire stood in the bathroom doorway watching him. She had showered, changed into the clothes the hotel had provided, a robe oversized, the kind that swallows you. Her hair was damp, and she'd taken off the heels, and the white dress was hanging on the back of the door, and she was just Claire standing in a bathrobe in a hotel room, watching her son sleep. The star pendant was still at her throat. "He hasn't slept like that in a long time," she said quietly, without the light on, without checking the door. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I just looked at Tommy and thought about a rocket ship sleeping bag on a plywood platform and a cracked flashlight that someone had left turned off. Claire crossed the room and sat in the other chair, the one across from mine, with the small table between us and the city lights of Pasadena visible through the glass. She pulled her knees up inside the robe and looked out at the lights for a while. "He asked me tonight," she said. "When Martinez was carrying him to the car, he woke up for a second. What did he ask? He asked if we were going home." She paused. I didn't know what to tell him. I said we were going somewhere safe. That was the right answer. He said, she stopped, started again. He said, "Is Grandpa coming?" Just like that. Like you'd always existed. Like you were just someone who'd been in the next room. I pressed my hand flat against my knee. "What did you tell him?" I said yes. She looked at me. "Was I right?" "Yes," I said. "You were right." She looked back at the lights. Outside, Pasadena was doing what cities do at night, moving, humming, indifferent to the specific weight of what had happened on one of its streets 6 hours ago. The Four Seasons was 22 floors up, and the sounds didn't reach us, and the lights were just lights spread out below, like something someone had dropped and left there. "I used to think about this," Claire said. "When I was in there, I used to make myself picture something specific so I had somewhere to put my mind when things got bad." She looked at her hands. "I always pictured a hotel room, somewhere clean, Tommy asleep, nobody counting how long until they came back." I looked at the room, the clean lines, the white sheets, the door that locked from the inside with a deadbolt and a chain, both of which Claire had engaged the moment we walked in, methodically without comment. "You're here," I said. "I know." She touched the star pendant. "It doesn't feel real yet. It will. Promise." I thought about the 6 years, about Portland and contracts and monthly wire transfers and the story I'd told myself, about a wooden box carried across 11 states. "Yes," I said. "I promise." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Dad." "Yeah. Thank you for coming home. Not thank you for coming back. Not thank you for saving us. Just thank you for coming home. Like it was the simplest thing. Like it was just a man returning to a place he was supposed to be. I didn't trust my voice enough to answer with words. So I reached across the small table and covered her hand with mine, the way I had in the dark carriage house 4 hours ago. And she turned her palm up and held on. Tommy made a sound in his sleep. Not distress, just the small, unconscious adjustment of a child resettling. He pulled Bear closer. His breathing evened out again. We sat there a while, the two of us, while the city moved below and Tommy slept, and the star pendant caught the light from the window and threw a small point of brightness against the wall. After a while, Claire's breathing slowed too. She was asleep in the chair before she knew she was going. Knees still pulled up, hands still loosely in mine head, tilted against the wing of the chair. I stayed where I was. I didn't move for a long time. Outside, somewhere in the city, a siren passed and faded, a car horn, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Tuesday night in Los Angeles moving through its hours, the same way it always had, without knowing or caring that something had been broken open and remade on one particular street in Pasadena. I looked at my daughter asleep in the chair and my grandson asleep on the bed. I had built a great many things in 62 years. None of them had required me to stay perfectly still in a chair, for fear that any movement would end something fragile. I stayed still anyway. It was the easiest thing I had done all night. The room had gone very quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when everyone in them is processing the same information at the same time, and none of them has finished yet. Marcus stood at the edge of the stage. Agent Reyes stood at the south entrance with 2 agents behind her and a warrant in her hand. I was at the north end of the room, still in the jacket with the mud on the sleeve. Nobody moved for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then Quincy Aldred walked back in. He had been at the south exit 1 foot, metaphorically out the door, I'd thought, but he had turned around. He came back through the remaining guests with the unhurried certainty of a man who has decided something and doesn't need to announce it, and he stopped 12 feet from the stage and looked at Marcus. "I want to say something," Quincy said, "before this proceeds." Agent Reyes looked at me. I gave her a small nod. She waited. "I've known this man," Quincy said, meaning Marcus, "for 4 years. I've attended his dinners. I've listened to his speeches. I've written checks to his foundation." He paused. "And I've known Walter Hale for 22 years. I walked the Burnside Bridge project with him in February of 2019, the month Marcus claims he died. Walter was alive, healthy, and concerned about the expansion joint tolerance on the east approach. He looked at me. He was right to be concerned. They had to redo it." He turned back to Marcus. "I'm telling you this, not because you don't already know it. You know exactly what you did. I'm telling you this because these people," he gestured at the guests still in the room, the 80 or so who had stayed, "deserved to hear someone say it plainly." He buttoned his jacket. "What you built here was a lie, and you built it on the name of a man who was working and paying taxes and trying to find his way back to his daughter while you were spending his money and letting her—" He stopped. His jaw tightened once. "While you were letting her disappear." The room absorbed this. A woman near the window pressed her hand over her mouth. The man with the forgotten champagne glass set it down on the nearest table. Carefully, like he needed to free his hands for whatever came next. Marcus said nothing. He was looking at Quincy with the expression of someone who has run every remaining calculation and found that none of them produces a useful result. Stewart stepped forward with his briefcase. He had been waiting near the east wall, patient organized the way good lawyers are patient and organized because patience and organization are the tools that work when everything else has run out. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, in the voice he used in courtrooms, clear, unhurried, no performance in it. "My name is Stewart Brack. I'm Mr. Hale's attorney. I want to briefly summarize what the evidence gathered tonight establishes, so that everyone in this room understands what they've been part of." He opened his briefcase and produced a single sheet. A summary the kind Stewart prepared the way other people breathed automatically and without effort. And in April of 2019, Marcus Vane filed a fraudulent death certificate for Walter Hale with the Los Angeles County Probate Court. The certificate was signed by Judge Harold Weiss, who is currently under Department of Justice investigation for accepting payments in exchange for favorable rulings. He looked up briefly, then back at the page. Using this certificate, Mr. Vane collected $752,000 from Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance. He subsequently filed a conservatorship petition for Claire Hale Vane, supported by a psychological evaluation signed by a physician whose license was revoked 7 months later for falsifying patient assessments. Someone in the room made a sound. Stewart continued without acknowledging it. Over the following years, Mr. Vane intercepted monthly wire transfers from Walter Hale totaling $360,000, funds Mr. Hale believed were supporting his daughter's medical care. Mr. Vane used these funds along with bridge loans secured against property he did not legally own to capitalize a Delaware LLC operating as the Hale Legacy Foundation. Tonight's event was designed as the final step in a scheme to transfer ownership of this property worth approximately $8.5 million through fraudulent means. He folded the page, put it back in the briefcase. Mr. Hale has been alive and working continuously since 1962, he said. His biometric records, tax filings, and financial activity confirm this without ambiguity. The death certificate is legally void. The conservatorship is legally void. The foundation's operating authority is legally void. He looked at the room. Everything built on those documents is built on nothing. The 80 remaining guests sat with this. Then from the left wing of the stage, Claire appeared. She had come back the same way she'd left quietly without announcement in the white dress that was now slightly less white at the hem from the garden path. She walked to the center of the stage and stood in the light that was still on, still trained on the podium, still illuminating the space where Marcus had given his speech 40 minutes ago. She looked at the room, not at Marcus, not at me, at the room. "I want to say one thing," she said. Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady, when the steadiness is not performance but architecture, something built over time from materials that don't give way. "I was in this house for 6 years, 3 of them in a room most of you have never seen, that I hope you never have reason to see." She paused. "I had a son during those years. He's 5 years old. He's safe tonight. That's because my father came home." She looked at me then, briefly, directly. "And because some people who work for my father are very good at their jobs." A ripple of something moved through the room, not laughter, something more complicated. "I'm not going to stand here and explain what it was like," Claire continued. "That's not why I came back in. I came back because I wanted to look at this room while I was still standing in it and say out loud where everyone can hear that I knew what was true. I've known for a long time. I just couldn't say it safely." She lifted her chin slightly. "I can now." She stepped back from the podium. Marcus was looking at his wife. I had watched him over the past hour cycle through composure and calculation, and controlled desperation and the collapse of all three, and what was on his face now was none of those things. It was simpler and worse, the expression of a man recognizing something he had not expected to recognize. Not guilt, not remorse, something more involuntary. The understanding that the person he thought he knew had never at any point actually existed. The woman standing at the edge of the stage with her bare feet and her mother's necklace and her voice that didn't shake, he had not made her. He had only made the conditions that revealed her. He looked away first. Agent Reyes moved. She crossed the room with the 2 agents behind her and stopped in front of the stage looking up at Marcus. "Mr. Vane," she said, "we've discussed the warrant. Are you ready to come with me?" Marcus looked at the warrant she was still holding. He looked at the screen behind the stage, dark now, nothing on it. He looked at the banner, or where the banner had been, before Cole's people had quietly removed it during the proceedings, leaving 2 clean bolt holes in the wall above the bar. "Yes," he said, for the second time that evening. The word had not gotten easier to say. He came down the stage steps without assistance. The remaining guests parted for him, the way water parts around something moving through it, not dramatically, just as a matter of physics, the natural result of proximity to something that has revealed its true nature. At the south door he paused. He did not look back at me. He did not look at Claire. He looked for one moment at the door itself, at the wood grain, the brass handle, the threshold he had crossed hundreds of times in 6 years, as the person in charge of what happened inside this house. Then Agent Reyes opened it, and he went through, and it closed behind him. The room breathed. I looked at Claire still on the stage. She looked back at me. "Okay," she said. Not to anyone in particular, to the room, to the evening, to the 6 years. "Okay. You think it's over. I thought so too. Before I show you what Marcus does next, comment 'not yet' if you felt that. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds changes everything one more time. Reminder, certain details in this story have been crafted for dramatic effect. Names, places, and some events are fictional, but the lesson this story carries that one is worth your time. Marcus made it 17 steps past the south door before he ran. I know because Cole counted. Cole counts things. It's a habit from 22 years of work that requires knowing exactly how far people get before they make the decision they were always going to make. 17 steps down the service corridor past the coat check alcove and the catering staging area, and then Marcus Vane stopped cooperating and started running. And the 2 agents behind him were good, but Marcus knew this house in a way they didn't because he had lived in it for 6 years and memorized it the way people memorize things they plan to use. He went left at the corridor junction instead of right toward the main exit through the utility passage that ran along the north side of the kitchen, out the back service door that opened onto the garden path. Cole was in my earpiece before Marcus hit the garden. "He's running, East Garden, heading for the carriage house." I was already moving. The garden at night was different from the garden I'd walked 3 hours earlier. Cole's people had set up perimeter lighting along the east wall, low-directed the kind that illuminates without announcing. The sycamore trees threw long shadows across the path. Somewhere behind me, I could hear the south door of the house opening, agents coordinating on radio, the controlled urgency of professionals managing a situation that had gone slightly sideways. I went through the garden faster than I should have given my knee in the dark and the fact that I was 62 years old and had already had a longer night than most people have in a year. I didn't care about my knee. Marcus reached the carriage house 30 seconds before I did. The door was open. Cole's people had left it open after extracting Tommy at 9:44, and Marcus went through it without slowing into the white-walled space that had been his control center for 3 years. The room where the system he'd built had been maintained and enforced and kept running. The room was empty. I reached the doorway and stopped. Marcus was standing in the center of the carriage house with both hands at his sides, looking at the open door of the small room at the back. The room where Tommy had been. The rocket ship sleeping bag still on the platform. The plastic cup from Wendy's still on the floor. The one-eyed bear gone. Martinez had gone back for it as instructed and taken it along with the boy. Marcus looked at the empty room for a long moment. Then he turned around. Cole was behind me. 2 agents flanked the doorway on either side. The perimeter lighting threw everything into sharp relief. The white walls, the old east wall with its water stains, the camera mount in the corner, the new window on the south side letting in the cold November air. Marcus looked at Cole, at the agents, at me. The calculation ran across his face in real time. I could see it the way you can see load-bearing calculations in a structure when you know what to look for. He was measuring distances, exits, options. There were none. "He's contained," Cole said into his radio. "Carriage house, all exits covered." Marcus's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. It was the smallest movement, barely visible. But I had been watching this man for the past 3 hours with the focused attention of someone who needed to understand exactly what he was at every moment, and that fraction of an inch was the first thing I had seen from him all night that wasn't performed. He was done. Then we all heard it. Footsteps on the garden path. Small ones fast. The specific rapid patter of a child who has been told to stay in the car and has made an independent assessment of that instruction. "Martinez," Cole said sharply into his radio. "Where is—" "He got out the door before I—" Tommy appeared in the carriage house doorway. He was still in his clothes from earlier, the ones he'd been wearing when Martinez pulled him out of the small room 3 hours ago now, with a granola bar wrapper sticking out of his jacket pocket. He had Bear under his arm. He looked at the room full of adults standing very still, and processed this with the rapid, unsentimental attention of a 5-year-old who has learned that adult stillness usually means something important is happening. Then he saw Marcus. He stopped. Marcus saw Tommy. Something moved across Marcus's face that I hadn't seen there before. Not the controlled performance, not the collapse of it, but something underneath both of those layers. Something that might have been in a different version of this man's life, actual feeling. He took a step toward Tommy. Cole moved. But Tommy was faster, not away from Marcus, which was what everyone in the room expected, but sideways, a quick instinctive pivot that put him behind the doorframe, one hand gripping the wood, peering around it at Marcus, with the cautious assessment of someone who has learned that the way adults move toward you tells you a great deal about what they want. Marcus stopped. He looked at the boy half hidden behind the doorframe, at the one-eyed bear clutched against Tommy's chest, at the granola bar wrapper in the jacket pocket. "Tommy," he said. His voice had lost all its registers, the warmth, the authority, the careful modulation of someone who has spent years managing how he sounds. What was left was just a voice, thin and unadorned. Tommy looked at him for a long moment. "Where's my mama?" Tommy said. Marcus opened his mouth. "She's right here." Claire's voice came from the garden path behind Tommy. She stepped into the doorway, one hand going immediately to Tommy's shoulder, drawing him back against her without drama. A single fluid movement, the kind that looks effortless because it comes from somewhere deeper than effort. She looked at Marcus over the top of Tommy's head. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The look was the whole sentence, everything she'd known and carried and survived, distilled into the particular clarity of a person who was no longer afraid. Marcus looked at his wife and his son standing in the doorway together, and the last of the calculation left his face. Cole stepped forward. "Marcus Vane," he said with the quiet finality of someone closing a door. "It's done." Marcus looked at the empty room at the back of the carriage house, at the sleeping bag still on the platform, at the window on the south wall that hadn't existed 3 years ago when he'd moved Claire in here, that one of Cole's people had broken the latch on during the original extraction to ensure additional ventilation while the medical team worked. He looked at it for a long time. "I know," he said. Cole nodded to the agents. They were efficient and quiet about it, professional in the way that Cole's people were always professional, which meant doing what needed to be done without making it more than it was. The handcuffs went on with a sound that was smaller than I expected, a soft double click in the cold air of the carriage house. Marcus didn't resist. He stood straight, which I thought was the last performance, the final insistence on a dignity that the evening had comprehensively dismantled, and then let them lead him out through the garden toward the waiting vehicles on the street. Tommy watched him go. When Marcus had disappeared around the corner of the garden wall, Tommy turned and looked up at Claire. "Is he coming back?" Tommy asked. Claire crouched down to his level. She took his face in both hands the way she must have done 1,000 times in the small room, in the 1 hour a day Marcus had allowed, the hour Tommy thought was just how things worked. "No," she said, simply, without elaboration. The way you answer a question when the true answer is the kindest one and also the shortest one. Tommy looked at her. "Okay," he said. He thought about it. "Can we go back to the pool hotel?" Claire made a sound that was half laugh and half something that had been waiting a long time to come out. "Yeah, buddy," she said. "We can go back to the pool hotel." She stood up and took his hand, and they walked back up the garden path, together past the rose garden, that was weeds now past the sycamore that had lost most of its leaves, toward the house, that was full of people dismantling an evening that had not gone the way it was planned. I stayed in the carriage house for a moment after they left, looked at the east wall, at the water stains, at the camera mount in the corner, with its red light finally permanently dark. Cole had cut the feed when his people secured the building, and no one had turned it back on. I looked at the small room at the back, the open door, the empty platform. Then I followed my family up the garden path. The front of the house looked different from 3 hours ago. The ornamental flower arrangements on the gate brackets were still there, but the gate itself was propped open. Cole's people had disabled the electronic latch during the operation and hadn't re-enabled it, which meant the gate that had closed in my face at 6:30 this evening was standing open, held by a simple rubber doorstop, like any gate on any street. The banner was gone. The bolt holes in the iron posts were just bolt holes. 4 FBI vehicles were parked along Oak Knoll Drive in the space where the Bentleys and Mercedes had been. The neighbors had turned their porch lights on. A man 3 houses down was standing on his front steps in a bathrobe watching, and had apparently decided that whatever was happening was sufficiently interesting to stand in the November cold for. Stewart was waiting near Vehicle 3 with his briefcase on the hood. He looked at me when I came through the gate, at Tommy holding Claire's hand, at the state of my jacket which had not improved during the past 3 hours. "Everything in order," he said. "Getting there," I said. He opened his briefcase. Agent Donna Reyes found me 10 minutes later, standing at the hood of Vehicle 3, while Stewart walked Claire through the quitclaim deed. Reyes was 48. I'd learned this at some point during the evening, without intending to, the way you absorb information about people when you've spent several hours depending on them. She had the particular quality of someone who had seen enough of what people were capable of that she'd stop being surprised by it, which meant she could be efficient about it instead. She stood beside me and looked at the paperwork on the hood. "Wasistas kidnapping charge," she said, not loudly. "What he did in the carriage house tonight, approaching the minor, with the apparent intent to use him as leverage, that's federal kidnapping, under 18 U.S.C. 1201. It's a life sentence charge. His attorney will argue he never touched the boy, never made an explicit threat." She paused. "He'd be right on both counts. But the jury sees a man running from federal agents toward a 5-year-old child, and juries have opinions about that. How does it affect the rest of the charges? It doesn't help him." She looked at the vehicle where Marcus was currently sitting in the back seat with an agent beside him, looking at nothing through the tinted window. Wire fraud, insurance fraud, forgery, conservatorship fraud, false imprisonment. Those are the load-bearing charges. 22 years minimum assuming no cooperation. She glanced at me. If he cooperates on the judge and the physician Weiss and Auerbach, the DOJ will consider a reduction. That's not my call. And Sylvia, in custody. She asked for her attorney before the handcuffs were on, which is either instinct or experience, and I've stopped trying to determine which in people her age. Reyes looked at the gate. False imprisonment, organized abuse conspiracy. The passport and the cash we found in the cabinet add attempted flight to the list. She'll argue she was acting under her son's direction. A pause. She won't be entirely wrong. It won't entirely help her. I looked at the vehicle where Marcus sat. He was still looking at nothing. His hands were in his lap, visible through the window. And I noticed the way you notice things at the end of long nights when the attention has been running at full capacity for hours and starts picking up details. It would normally edit out that his left hand was resting over his right, not gripping, just resting, the posture of someone who has stopped bracing. "Mr. Hale," Reyes said. "Walter," I said. She considered this briefly. "Walter, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer. Go ahead. The monthly transfers, $360,000 over 6 years. She looked at me directly. You never asked for statements, never requested confirmation that the funds were being used as intended, never made an unannounced visit. It wasn't a question, but it was waiting for something. No, I said, I didn't. Why not? I thought about that. I thought about a hospital room and a promise made in grief, and 6 years of telling myself that distance was temporary, that the money was sufficient, that the calls that got shorter were just the natural rhythm of adult children finding their own lives. I thought about the 17 ways I had explained my own absence to myself over 6 years, and how none of them had been a lie exactly, and none of them had been the whole truth. Because checking would have meant admitting I should have been here, I said, and I wasn't ready to admit that. Reyes was quiet for a moment. That's an honest answer, she said. It's the only kind I have left tonight. She nodded, looked at the paperwork on the hood where Stuart was guiding Claire through the final signature. Tommy was sitting on the bumper of Vehicle 3, eating another granola bar, swinging his feet, narrating something to Bear in a low voice about the FBI vehicles and their cleanliness relative to Cole's Suburbans, which he had apparently been conducting a comparative analysis of for the past hour. For what it's worth, Reyes said, what Claire did tonight at that podium, that's not nothing. In cases like this, the victim's public statement is often what breaks the psychological hold for the people around them. 300 people heard her say it. Every one of them is going to remember it. She knew what she was doing, I said. I know, Dr. Marsh confirmed it. She looked at Claire, signing the last page of the deed with Stuart's pen, Tommy now watching, with the focused interest of a child who has decided that document signing is more interesting than it looks. She's going to need time. The physical recovery is the easier part. I know. Do you have a plan for the next few months? We're working on it, I said, which was true. We had talked in pieces on the stage steps and in the back of the Suburban with Tommy between us about what the next few months might look like. A rental somewhere with good light and no associations. Dr. Marsh had given Claire a referral before she left. Tommy was going to need school, a real one with other children, and a teacher who understood that he'd been living in unusual circumstances without knowing they were unusual. There was a great deal of work ahead. I found standing on the sidewalk outside my own house at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in November that I was not afraid of it. Stuart capped his pen and looked up. Signed, witnessed, and notarized, he said. He stamped the bottom of the deed with the notary seal, small official, the sound of something being made permanent. I'll file with the county recorder's office when they open Thursday morning. As of that filing, the property is legally Claire Marie Hale's in full. Claire looked at the deed in her hands. She was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say, but the silence of someone taking a measurement, determining the weight of something before deciding how to carry it. What do I do with a house I don't want to live in? She said. That, Stuart said, closing his briefcase with a click, is not a legal question. I know what I want to do with it, she said. She looked at me. I told you in the library. I meant it. I know you did. Is it possible, legally, practically, is it actually possible? A 501c3 nonprofit shelter, Stuart said, as if she'd asked him rather than me. California has a streamlined process for property conversion to charitable use. 6 to 8 months for full certification, assuming no complications. The property value means you'd have significant operating capital from the conversion equity. He paused. It's not only possible, it's straightforward. Claire looked at the deed. Then she looked at the carriage house visible at the end of the garden path. Dark now, the new window a pale rectangle in the wall. Good, she said. At 11:47, the last FBI vehicle pulled away from Oak Knoll Drive. Cole shook my hand at the gate, a brief firm grip, the handshake of two people who have done something together that neither of them will describe in detail to anyone who wasn't there. Good night, Walter, he said. Thank you, Cole, I said, for all of it. He gave me a look that meant he had heard the full weight of those 4 words and was choosing not to make anything more of it than it was, which was exactly the right response. He got in the lead Suburban and drove away. Tommy had fallen asleep in the back of Vehicle 2 during the legal proceedings, which was Cole's vehicle, which created a brief logistical discussion about how to transfer a sleeping 5-year-old without waking him. I stood at the gate after everyone had gone. The street was quiet. The neighbor in the bathrobe had gone back inside. The porch lights were turning off one by one. The house behind me was dark, except for the front hallway light, which ran on a timer, and didn't know that tonight had been any different from any other Tuesday. I looked at the bolt holes in the iron post. Then I looked at the street the direction the taxi had come from 6 hours ago, with a wooden box in my lap, and no plan except to surprise my daughter on her birthday. I reached into my jacket pocket. The wooden box was still there, lighter now, the necklace where it was supposed to be, the velvet interior empty. I closed my fingers around it. Then I walked to the rental car, got in the driver's seat, and took my family to the Pool Hotel. 3 days later, the FBI released the property. The official notice arrived by email, a single paragraph, bureaucratic and bloodless, informing the legal owner of record that the premises at 1247 Oak Knoll Drive had been cleared for re-entry following completion of evidence collection. Stewart forwarded it to me at 7:42 in the morning with no additional comment, which was how Stewart communicated that something significant had happened, and he was leaving the response to me. I drove to the Pool Hotel and knocked on Claire's door. She answered in pajamas. Tommy visible behind her eating cereal at the small table by the window, with Bear propped against the juice glass. The house is ours, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Give me 10 minutes. The house was quieter than empty. Not silent, the refrigerator hummed, the heater ticked the pipes, made the small adjustments they always make when a building has been closed for days and then opened again. But the human sound was gone. The 200 guests, the string quartet, the clink of champagne, glasses, the particular murmur of a room full of people performing grief for a man they'd been told was dead. All of it gone absorbed into the walls or simply evaporated, the way sounds do when the occasion that generated them no longer exists. Tommy ran ahead through the front gate. He had brought Bear and was narrating something about the garden to him in the ongoing monologue he maintained with the stuffed animal, which covered topics ranging from the comparative cleanliness of FBI vehicles to the question of whether sycamore trees preferred being talked to. Claire walked more slowly. I stayed beside her. We went through the main rooms without talking much. The ballroom still smelled faintly of lilies. The flowers had been removed, but the scent had gotten into the walls the way smells do when too many flowers have been too close together for too long. Claire stopped in the doorway of the music room. Margaret's piano stood against the north wall undisturbed. It was the reason we'd built the addition, 3 weekends of arguing about window placement, the architect's clear story solution, Claire handing me screws and criticizing my technique while Margaret watched from a lawn chair with iced tea and cheerful commentary. Claire crossed the room and pressed one key. Middle C. It rang out and hung in the cold air and faded. It needs tuning, she said. It needs a lot of things, I said. She pressed it once more. Let it fade. Then we went to the library. The floor panel was exactly where I'd left it. Third board from the east wall, the one with the slight discoloration at the north end. I pressed the edge, and it released good hardware properly installed, holding after 20 years, the way things hold when they're built right. Inside the small box Margaret and I had placed there the week we moved in. A thing the house keeps for us, she'd said. I lifted it out. Inside a photograph. The 4 of us, me, Margaret, Claire, at 7, and Biscuit the golden retriever, who had lived 14 years and died one August afternoon, and whom I still thought about with uncomplicated love. We were in the backyard, someone shooting from the second floor, all of us looking at different things. Beneath the photograph, a wristwatch. Margaret's. The one she'd worn every day. I had not put it there. I turned it over. On the back, scratched in Margaret's handwriting, "For Claire. The time is yours now." I held it out to Claire without speaking. She took it from me, looked at the inscription, then sat down on the library floor, not in a chair on the floor, cross-legged the way she'd done homework in here, as a child while I read by the window. She held the watch in both hands and didn't try to manage her face. I sat down beside her. Tommy appeared in the doorway, assessed the situation, and sat between us with Bear. He looked at the watch in Claire's hands, lips moving slightly as he read the inscription. "What does that mean?" he asked. "The time is yours now." Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand. "It means Grandma saved something for me." Tommy considered this. "For a long time?" "A long time." He nodded, satisfied. He leaned against Claire's arm. She put her hand on top of his head, automatic and sure. After a while, Tommy said, "Is this our house?" Claire looked at me. "It's yours," I told her. "Whatever you want." She looked around the library. At the books, the open floor panel, the east window throwing cold November light across the boards I'd laid myself. "I don't want to live here," she said. "But I don't want to erase it either." She looked at the watch. "I want to put it to use, something that means someone else doesn't have to go through." She stopped, started again. "Something true." "What do you want to put on the carriage house?" I said, because I already knew that was where she was going. "No one performs for food here," she said. "No one stays silent to survive." Tommy looked up. "What does performs mean?" "Doing something you don't want to do," I said, "because you're afraid of what happens if you don't." He thought about it. "Like the math worksheet. A little like that, more serious." "Oh." He looked at the floor panel still open. "Did you build that?" "I built all of it." He looked around the library with new assessment, the shelves, the window, the floor, the considering expression of someone revising an opinion based on new information. "Okay," he said. Then, "Can we get lunch?" Claire laughed, the real kind unguarded from somewhere uncomplicated. "Yeah," she said. "We can get lunch." She stood up, fastened Margaret's watch on her wrist, held out her hand to Tommy. He took it. I closed the floor panel and followed them out. 1 year later, almost to the day. November in Pasadena, again cold and clear, the sycamores stripped to their bones, the light coming in low, and considered the way November light does when it's decided to be honest about the season. I stood on the sidewalk outside 1247 Oak Knoll Drive and looked at the sign above the gate. Sunrise House. No one left behind. White letters on dark green. Simple. Readable from the street. Mounted where the banner had been. A year ago, I had stood on this same sidewalk with a wooden box and my own face on a funeral banner, and a daughter I didn't know was 30 feet away in the dark. A year ago, this gate had closed in my face with a sound like a period ending a sentence. It was open now, propped with a plain rubber doorstop, the way any gate on any street stays open when people are expected. Inside the house had been remade without being demolished. The floors I'd laid were still there. The beams, the windows, the addition we'd argued about for 3 weekends, until the architect found a solution that satisfied everyone, all still there, reorganized around a different purpose. Consultation spaces where the formal dining room had been. A common area where the ballroom had held 300 people in black tie. A kitchen Rosa ran with the same focused competence she'd brought to everything in the 22 years she'd worked for this family. Rosa had come back in January. She'd called from a blocked number, which told me she was still careful about certain things, and asked if there was a place for her. I told her there were several. She arrived 2 days later with 2 suitcases and a large pot she had owned for 30 years, and considered non-negotiable. The pot was on the stove now. Something with onions and bay leaves, the kind of smell that makes a large building feel briefly like somewhere people actually live. Claire was in the East Wing when I found her, sitting across a small table from a young woman I didn't recognize, mid-20s dark circles, the particular posture of someone newly arrived somewhere safe and still deciding whether it will stay that way. Claire leaned forward with her elbows on the table, talking in the low, unhurried voice she'd developed over the past year for exactly this kind of conversation. I didn't interrupt. I watched from the doorway instead. At some point in the past 12 months, my daughter had become someone I recognized from a direction I hadn't expected. Not the Claire I'd left 6 years ago. Not the Claire I'd found in the carriage house, but someone who contained both of those people and had built something functional out of the distance between them. She caught my eye through the doorway. A small nod. "I'll be a few minutes." I nodded back and kept moving. The carriage house was at the end of the garden path. Cleaned, repaired, insulated, replumbed. New roof. Interior painted white. A window on the south wall where there had never been one. But the east wall had been left exactly as it was. Original stucco water-stained, cracked. The camera mount still in the upper corner bracket of metal that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what it had held. Beside it, at eye level, a frame panel in dark wood and simple glass. No one performs for food here. No one stays silent to survive. This wall was left standing on purpose. I stood in front of it for a while. Then I heard Tommy. He came down the garden path at full speed, which was how he moved most of the time now. The flat-out aerodynamic commitment of a 6-year-old who has recently determined that faster is almost always better. He skidded to a stop in the doorway, saw me and came to stand beside me in front of the wall. He could read now. Kindergarten had seen to that with efficiency that still surprised me. His lips moved. "No one performs for food here." He looked up. "Grandpa, it says no one performs for food here." He pointed at the sign. "Is that about what you told me? About being scared of what happens if you don't?" I looked at him. 6 years old, and he'd carried that word all the way from the library floor to this wall. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "That's exactly what it's about." "Oh." He looked at the camera mount. "Was someone here before?" "Yes." "Are they okay now?" I looked at the water stains on the old stucco, at the new window on the south wall throwing a clean rectangle of light across the floor, at the doorway where the carriage house opened onto the garden, the sycamores visible at the end of the path, the house beyond them, with Rose's kitchen and Claire's voice and the smell of something warm on the stove. "They are now," I said. Tommy nodded, satisfied. He reached up and took my hand, just reached up and took it the way children do, when they're standing somewhere that feels significant and want to be connected to someone they trust. We stood there a moment, then Claire appeared in the doorway, Margaret's watch on her wrist, the star pendant at her throat. The clear, unhurried expression of someone who has finished a long and difficult thing and is beginning to understand what comes after. She looked at Tommy holding my hand, and something happened in her face, quick, unguarded, gone, before she tried to name it. "Ready," she said. "Almost," I said. I looked around the carriage house one last time. The white walls, the new window, the old wall kept on purpose. The framed card in dark wood and simple glass. I came home to find I had been erased. I stayed to make sure no one else would be. "Okay," I said. I let Tommy pull me toward the door, toward the garden, toward the house that was finally being used for the right thing. The last guest left at 4:17 in the afternoon. I know because I was standing at the front window of what used to be the formal dining room, now a consultation space with 2 chairs and a small table, and a box of tissues that Rosa had placed there without being asked, and I watched a woman in a gray coat walk through the gate and turn left on Oak Knoll Drive and disappear around the corner. And when she was gone, the street was quiet in the particular way. Streets go quiet in November when the light starts failing at 4 o'clock and everyone who has somewhere to be has already gone there. I stayed at the window a moment longer. Then I went to find the house. It takes a building time to become itself. I've known this since I was 24 years old, and poured my first foundation on a residential job in Eugene, Oregon, working for a contractor who told me that a house isn't finished when the last nail goes in. It's finished when the first argument happens in the kitchen, when the first child marks their height on the doorframe, when someone burns toast at 2 in the morning because they can't sleep, and the smell of it gets into the walls and stays there. I walked through Sunrise House the way I'd walked through 100 buildings over 40 years, not looking for problems, just listening. Feeling the way the rooms held themselves. The consultation spaces were quiet, now chairs pushed back to where they'd been that morning. The common area still smelled faintly of Rose's lunch, something with garlic and rosemary that had gotten into the curtains. The hallway between the east wing and the kitchen had a small scuff on the baseboard where a cart had clipped it, and I made a mental note to touch it up, and then caught myself making the note and almost smiled. Some things don't change. I ended up in the library. I always ended up in the library. Margaret had predicted this when we were designing the house. You'll spend half your time in there pretending to read and actually just thinking, she'd said, and she had been correct on both counts for 20 years. The floor panel was closed. I'd closed it myself the last time we were here 3 days after the FBI released the property, after we'd found the watch and the photograph, and sat on the floor together while Tommy asked about lunch. I sat in the chair by the east window, the one I'd read in when Claire was doing homework on the floor. The light was going 4:30 now, the sky outside turning the particular shade of gray gold that November afternoons produce when they're deciding whether to end gently or just stop. I thought about a taxi that smelled like pine air freshener. I thought about a banner with my face on it and a gate that closed like a period at the end of a sentence. I thought about a carriage house that smelled like mold and neglect, and a woman folded into the corner of it who weighed almost nothing and said one word like she'd been saving it. I thought about a small boy with builder's hands asleep with a one-eyed bear. I thought about what it cost to build something, the real cost, not the materials and the labor and the permits and the inspections, but the cost underneath all of that. The decisions made in the middle of the night, the things you put down in the wrong place and have to move, the walls you raise before you understand the load they'll be asked to carry. I had built a great many things in 62 years. The best of them was not a building. Dad, Claire stood in the library doorway. She had Margaret's watch on her wrist and the star pendant at her throat, and a smudge of something ink or coffee or both on the back of her left hand, the mark of a day that had been full of small necessary things. "Tommy's asking for you," she said. "Rosa made dinner. She says if you don't come now, it'll get cold, and she will not be responsible for what happens after that." "That sounds like Rosa," I said. "It is exactly like Rosa." I looked at the floor panel, at the east window with the last of the November light coming through it, at the chair I'd sat in for 20 years, thinking while pretending to read, which Margaret had known about all along. I stood up. "Claire," I said. She waited. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. Not for the first time, not for the last. But this time in the library in this chair with the light going outside, it needed to be said one more time in this specific room. For all of it. For the years I stayed away and told myself it was enough to send money. It wasn't enough. I know that." Claire looked at me for a moment. "I know you know," she said. "Not as absolution, not as accusation. Simply as a fact between two people who have stopped needing to perform anything for each other." She held out her hand. I took it. We walked out of the library together, down the hallway that smelled like garlic and rosemary, toward the kitchen, where Rosa was making noise about cold food, and Tommy was explaining something urgent to Bear about the proper temperature of soup, and the house around us held the particular warmth of a building that has finally, after everything, become what it was always supposed to be. Not a monument to loss. Not a monument to anything. Just a place where people could come when they had nowhere else to go. And the door was open. This is my family story, and I'm not proud of every chapter. I spent 6 years telling myself that sending money was the same as being present. It wasn't. Distance doesn't protect the people you love. It just creates space for the wrong people to fill. Family betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a tuxedo standing at the gate of a house you built, telling you that you're dead. I learned that the hard way. Don't be like me. Don't choose an empire over a dinner table. Don't let silence substitute for showing up. The people who need you most won't always say so. And by the time you realize it, years may already be gone. I believe this money can build walls, but only presence builds trust. And family betrayal heals slowly if it heals at all, only through time and showing up over and over without excuses. God gave me a second chance that most people never get. I don't take that lightly. This family story ends with an open door. I hope yours does too. If any part of this family story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible to the people you love, or been betrayed by someone who should have protected you, share this, leave a comment below, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. And a gentle note, some stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely to educate and inspire. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what serves your heart best.